The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the absence of sound. There was plenty of that. My sister was crying, my father was shouting. Someone had dropped a wine glass and it rolled in small, helpless circles across the marble floor of the banquet hall. But the kind of silence I'm talking about is internal. The moment your pulse steadies while everyone else's spirals. The Mercer Family Foundation Gala had been designed to look like old money pretending to be humble, crystal chandeliers, white linen. A live jazz trio tucked discreetly near the bar, the kind of room where reputations are polished like silverware, and now it was coming apart. On the massive screen behind the stage, where moments earlier a slideshow of community outreach initiatives had been looping, my presentation had replaced it, not a slideshow, an autopsy. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, property deeds moved into shell trusts, emails with timestamps and digital signatures. My brother's voice memos discussing asset protection strategies in case of unexpected legal scrutiny. My father stood frozen near the podium, tuxedo immaculate. Face the color of paper left in the sun too long. This is a mistake, he kept saying. This is some kind of misunderstanding. It was. My sister lunged toward me, mascara streaking down her cheeks. How could you do this? She hissed, as if I had betrayed something sacred. That was the part that almost made me laugh. Sacred. The reporters in the back were already filming. Phones were raised like candles at a vigil. Board members whispered urgently into Bluetooth headsets. I stood near the edge of the stage, hands clasped loosely in front of me, watching the empire implode with the precision of a controlled demolition. No screaming, no theatrics. Just gravity doing what gravity always does when the foundation cracks. But to understand how I turned my own family into a memory, we have to go back to the beginning. If you asked anyone in my family who kept things stable, they'd say my father. If you asked who actually made sure the mortgage cleared on the first, the catering invoices were paid before vendors started calling, and the foundation's tax filings didn't trigger audits. They'd blink, then probably change the subject. I was the anchor, the ballast, the unglamorous weight that kept the Mercer name upright while everyone else climbed the mast and waved. My father was the visionary, that's what the local papers called him, real estate developer turned philanthropist. He had the handshake, the voice, the silver hair that made donors trust him instinctively. He could stand behind a podium and talk about legacy like he'd personally invented the concept. My brother Caleb was the strategist, MBA, tailored suits, teeth too white to be accidental. He handled growth, expansion, new properties, new partnerships. He was the one shaking hands at ribbon cuttings, smiling for photos in front of low-income housing developments we'd revitalized. And me, I was the one who made sure the math worked. I handled the books for Mercer Holdings and the Mercer Family Foundation. I knew which properties were leveraged and which were barely afloat. I negotiated with banks quietly when interest rates shifted. I restructured loans when projects ran over budget because someone had promised marble instead of laminate during a donor dinner. At 26, I moved back into the family orbit after my mother passed, not because I wanted to, because someone had to keep the lights on, literally. There was a week where the foundation's operating account dipped too low because Caleb had reallocated funds to secure a flashy new property deal. Payroll for our nonprofit staff was about to bounce. I covered it from my savings. Temporary transfer, Caleb had said casually, not even looking up from his phone. We'll balance it next quarter. That phrase again, balance it next quarter. I spent that night in the foundation office, the overhead fluorescents flickering like they couldn't quite commit to staying alive. I drank vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and updated spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. The janitor nodded at me on his way out around 11 p.m. No one else noticed. At family dinners, my father would toast Caleb's bold moves and thank donors for believing in our mission. My name rarely came up unless something needed fixing. Ask him, my father would say, gesturing vaguely in my direction. He's good with details, as if I were a footnote to their headline, but details are where truth lives. I paid bills. I caught errors, I absorbed risk, I softened crises before they reached the dinner table. They got applause, I got responsibility, and the thing about anchors. You only appreciate them when the ship starts drifting. The betrayal didn't happen in a shouting match. It happened in a conference room that smelled like lemon cleaner and stale ambition. It was a Thursday afternoon when Caleb asked me to sit in on a meeting with our estate attorney. That wasn't unusual. I handled most of the financial modeling for the foundation and the holding company. If there were numbers involved, I was usually there. The attorney, Ms. Holloway, was precise and humorless in a way I respected. She slid a leather folder across the table and said, "We've finalized the revised structure for Mercer Holdings and the Foundation Trust." Revised structure. My father leaned back, satisfied. Caleb looked almost bored. I opened the folder. At first it was just legal language, trust allocations, voting shares, asset protection clauses. I skimmed until I saw something that made my throat tighten. Founders' equity transfer. My name wasn't there. I blinked and flipped back a page. Originally, when my grandfather started Mercer Holdings, the shares were to be split evenly among direct heirs who actively participated in management. I'd read that clause dozens of times. It was the only reason I'd tolerated the late nights and the fluorescent migraines. It meant my work translated into ownership. Now, under the revised structure, voting shares were consolidated. Primary control vested in Caleb Mercer. My father cleared his throat. "It's just a cleaner structure. Investors like clarity." I looked at Caleb. He didn't meet my eyes. "This eliminates my equity," I said quietly. "Not eliminates," Caleb corrected smoothly. "Reallocates. You'll receive a fixed annual compensation package, generous actually, compensation." As if I were an employee, as if I hadn't built half the financial scaffolding that kept this place upright. "I qualify under the original clause," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. "I've been managing operational finance for 5 years. Ms. Holloway adjusted her glasses. "The revised documents redefine management as executive-level strategic leadership. The board voted last week. The board, 3 family friends, 2 longtime donors, my father, no one had told me." The fluorescent light above us buzzed faintly. I could hear my own heartbeat in the hollow space between sentences. "You held the vote without me?" I asked. Caleb finally looked up. "You're not on the board." I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because the alternative was something louder. "So I build the structure," I said slowly, "and you remove me from ownership of it." My father's expression hardened slightly. "Don't be dramatic. This protects the family legacy." The family legacy, that phrase again. I realized then that legacy in our house meant control. It meant image. It meant Caleb on magazine covers and my father on charity boards. It did not mean fairness. "You should be proud," Caleb added, almost kindly. "This frees you from the pressure of decision-making. You're better with numbers anyway." There it was, the final demotion from partner to payroll. I closed the folder carefully. My hands didn't shake. That was the strangest part. I felt hollow. 5 years of deferred vacations. 5 years of reinvesting bonuses back into liquidity gaps. 5 years of absorbing risk so the Mercer name never cracked. And in a single vote, when I wasn't even invited to, they erased me from the future of the company I kept alive. Not an affair, not a scandal, something worse. They stole my legacy in broad daylight and called it restructuring. And as I walked out of that conference room, the lemon cleaner scent clinging to my clothes, I understood something with terrifying clarity. I wasn't just invisible, I was expendable. And expendable things don't stay loyal forever. I didn't confront them again. That was the part that unsettled Caleb later, the quiet. If I'd yelled, stormed out, threatened lawsuits, they would have known how to respond. My family understood noise. They were fluent in outrage. They could spin anger into narrative, narrative into sympathy. Silence, though, silence doesn't give you anything to defend against. The morning after the restructuring, I showed up at the office at 7:15 a.m. like I always did. Same navy button-down, same thermos of coffee. Same nod to the receptionist who assumed I just loved routine. I opened my laptop and logged into Mercer Holdings' financial dashboard. Nothing had changed on the surface. Payroll ran. Vendor invoices queued, property taxes scheduled. The foundation's quarterly disbursement plan sat waiting for final approval. I worked through it all methodically. If anyone had been watching me closely, they would have seen something new in my posture. Not anger, precision. Caleb stopped by my office around 10. "Hey," he said casually, leaning against the doorframe. "You good?" I looked up, neutral. "With what?" He hesitated half a second too long. "Yesterday, the vote." I know it was a surprise, I shrugged lightly. "You're right, it's cleaner this way." He blinked. Relief flickered across his face so fast it was almost embarrassing. "I knew you'd understand," he said. "You've always been the rational one." Rational, translation, controllable. He left satisfied. That was the moment I committed to the long game. I wasn't just the anchor, I was the auditor, and auditors don't react emotionally to discrepancies. They document them. I started by mapping the corporate structure as it now stood. Mercer Holdings owned the majority of the real estate assets. The Mercer Family Foundation leased several properties at below-market rates to maintain nonprofit status optics. Caleb now held consolidated voting shares in the holding company, but the foundation remained a separate legal entity, technically bound by fiduciary duty to its charitable mission. That distinction mattered because while ownership could be restructured quietly, fiduciary violations could not. I began downloading archival financial statements perfectly within my access rights. 5 years of transfers between the holding company and the foundation, intercompany loans labeled as temporary liquidity adjustments. I flagged patterns. Large transfers occurring 2 weeks before major investor meetings. Funds moved from foundation reserves into holding company accounts, then returned, slightly reduced after quarterly reporting closed. Temporary, always temporary, except temporary becomes fraud when disclosure laws are involved. I didn't accuse, I cross-referenced dates of transfers against public filings. Board meeting minutes against actual fund movements. Email approvals against timestamp bank authorizations. Every discrepancy got its own encrypted folder on an external drive I purchased with cash from a hardware store 3 neighborhoods away. Paranoid? Maybe. But infrastructure fails quietly before it collapses publicly. At home, I acted unchanged. Family dinners continued. My father toasted Caleb's decisive leadership. I passed the salt. I asked about upcoming zoning hearings. I listened. I watched how freely they spoke now that I was compensated staff instead of equity partner. They assumed I was deflated. They mistook composure for acceptance. One night after dinner, Caleb lingered in the kitchen while I loaded the dishwasher. "You're not still hung up on the shares, are you?" he asked lightly. I closed the dishwasher and looked at him. "It's business," he smiled. Exactly, that word again, business. He believed what he'd done was strategic. He believed loyalty was a one-way contract. What he didn't understand was that business has rules, and when you start bending them, someone who understands the structure can snap them back into place. Over the next 2 months, I refined what I privately called the legal execution plan. Step 1. Establish a clear, documented pattern of fund misallocation between the foundation and holding company. Step 2. Identify board members who had signed off on filings that contradicted internal transfers. Step 3. Secure independent verification, an external forensic accountant who owed me a favor from a past consulting job. Step 4. Wait, because timing is leverage. The foundation's annual gala was scheduled for October. Major donors, press coverage, a keynote speech from Caleb about ethical stewardship, visibility, the kind they loved. And I intended to use it, but revenge, real revenge, isn't explosive, it's procedural. I kept reconciling accounts, kept fixing vendor disputes, kept covering payroll shortfalls quietly when transfers ran late. I became even more indispensable, even more invisible. And every night after the house went quiet, I sat at my kitchen table under a single warm lamp, cross-checking numbers while the hum of the refrigerator filled the room. Cold coffee. Open spreadsheets, a legal pad filled with dates and arrows and circled amounts. I wasn't plotting chaos, I was building a case, because when the time came, I didn't want drama. I wanted documentation, and documentation doesn't scream, it indicts. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been the person who holds everything together while someone else takes the credit? I'm talking about the quiet ones, the ones who know where every dollar goes, the ones who fix mistakes before they become disasters. The ones who get called reliable instead of important. It's Chicago, early October. The air smells like rain and expensive cologne, and I'm standing outside a ballroom where my last name is printed in gold lettering. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been erased in your own story, stay with me, because this is where it turns. The ballroom smelled like champagne and polished wood. Gold lettering on the backdrop read, "The Mercer Family Foundation Annual Gala, building tomorrow." A string quartet played something soft and forgettable while donors in tailored tuxedos floated between tables like well-fed ghosts. Caleb stood near the stage, radiant, confident, untouchable. He'd perfected the look, measured humility, calculated gratitude. My father hovered nearby, shaking hands, laughing just a little too loudly. I stood near the back wall beside the audiovisual technician, invisible, again. When Caleb took the podium, the room quieted on cue. "Tonight," he began, voice warm and resonant, "we celebrate transparency, stewardship, and community impact." I almost admired the symmetry. On the projection screen behind him, slides displayed smiling families in renovated apartments, children holding backpacks, shiny kitchens, carefully curated hope. Then it was my turn, not formally. But procedurally, I nodded to the AV technician. "Play the updated deck," I said calmly. He hesitated. "This isn't the it's approved," I replied, sliding him an email printout with Caleb's digital signature authorizing financial transparency summary. He hadn't read the attachment when he signed it. He never did. The slide changed. The smiling family vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet, black background, clean white font. "Exhibit A," I said quietly, stepping toward the stage. Caleb turned, confused. "What is this?" "A reconciliation report," I replied, voice amplified now through the mic I had just picked up. "Foundation reserve transfers to Mercer Holdings over the last 5 fiscal years." The room shifted, not panic, attention. Dates illuminated one by one. Amounts: $2.4 million, $3.1 million, $1.8 million, each labeled as temporary liquidity adjustment, I continued. Each returned after quarterly reporting deadlines, each reduced by administrative fees. My father stepped forward. "This is not the time, it is precisely the time," I said. I clicked the remote. Slide 2, side-by-side comparison of publicly filed foundation disclosures and internal bank statements. Highlighted discrepancies in red. "These are certified filings submitted to the IRS," I explained evenly, "signed by board members present in this room." A murmur rippled through the tables. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're misinterpreting standard operating." "Then let's clarify," I interrupted gently. Slide 3, audio waveform, a timestamp. I pressed play. Caleb's voice filled the ballroom. "We'll move it out before reporting closes. No one checks the raw transfers, it's optics." Silence, heavy, unforgiving. Phones began to rise. I wasn't improvising. "I was sequencing. Exhibit D," I continued. Emails confirming directive to conceal transfer classification. On cue, printed copies were distributed, prepared in advance, courtesy of an independent forensic accountant who had verified every document. Board members shifted in their seats. Donors whispered sharply. A reporter near the front stepped closer. "This isn't an attack," I said calmly. "It's documentation." Caleb's composure cracked first. "You're violating internal confidentiality agreements." "No," I replied. "I'm fulfilling fiduciary duty." I turned toward the room. "The Mercer Family Foundation is legally obligated to operate in the public interest. Diverting charitable funds to temporarily stabilize private assets without transparent disclosure constitutes misrepresentation." My father looked smaller suddenly, not weak, just exposed. The quartet had stopped playing. No one had told them to, they just stopped. "An official complaint," I added almost conversationally, "has already been filed with the Attorney General's office and the IRS. The documentation you're holding matches what they now have. A controlled demolition, not loud, not chaotic, structural." Caleb stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. "How long?" he whispered. "Long enough," I said. Security didn't remove anyone. No one screamed, but the room had shifted irrevocably. Donors stepped back. Board members avoided eye contact. Reporters stepped forward, and for the first time in my life I wasn't the anchor. I was the reckoning. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. When documentation is clean, momentum follows. Within weeks, the Foundation's board suspended Caleb pending review. My father resigned to focus on personal matters. Federal auditors began combing through 5 years of filings. Headlines weren't dramatic, they were worse. Mercer Foundation under scrutiny for fund misallocation. Clinical, unemotional, permanent. At home, the house felt unfamiliar. No more celebratory toasts, no more confident speeches about legacy. "Just silence," my sister called once. "You could have handled this privately," she said quietly. I thought about that. Private correction, private accountability, private erasure. "That's how it's always been handled," I replied. She didn't argue. The holding company survived, scaled down, scrutinized, restructured under independent oversight. The foundation entered compliance review, its future uncertain. I was asked to remain temporarily during the transition. I declined, not dramatically, just decisively. Because anchors don't stay attached to ships that try to drown them, I moved into a smaller apartment across the river, new furniture, fewer obligations. The quiet felt different now, less heavy. People ask if it was worth it, if dismantling your own family's empire leaves scars. Of course it does. But here's the question no one likes to answer. If you discover the foundation of your life is built on deception, do you reinforce it? Or do you let it fall? I didn't act out of rage. I acted out of alignment. Receipts don't shout, they testify. So I'll leave you with this. If you were the only one in the room who knew the truth, would you protect the name? Or protect your integrity? Let me know, because sometimes the most dangerous betrayal is what they did to you. It's what you're willing to tolerate.